There are moments in life when a child's world becomes heavier than it should ever be. For 7-year-old Kayla Bennett, that moment began on a cold Monday morning in late November, long before the sun had fully risen over eastern Pennsylvania. Her neighborhood was just beginning to stir, porch lights still glowing, cars warming up in driveways, the icy smell of winter clinging to the air. And yet, even with all the signs of another normal school day, something felt different in the quiet around her. Something felt wrong. Kayla walked beside her mother, Danielle, holding her hand tightly. She wasn't a clingy kid, not usually. She was the curious type, the kind who asked questions about everything, who collected feathers, who built little houses for stray cats out of shoe boxes and old t-shirts. But that morning, her small fingers trembled around her mother. Danielle felt it. Any parent would have felt it. And truthfully, Danielle had been feeling it for a while. The way Kayla's laughter had faded, the way she jumped at sudden sounds, how her once bright eyes seemed to always search the shadows. They crossed the intersection at Laurel and 3rd Street, the same one Kayla had crossed 100 times. But today, every step seemed to pull something heavier out of her chest. "Baby," Danielle said gently, squeezing her hand, "you sure you don't want to talk to me about what's been going on?" Kayla's head shook once, quick, automatic, practiced. Danielle swallowed. She knew that answer. She had given that answer at 7 years old too. The two of them approached the corner where they normally said goodbye. Danielle had to turn back for work, while Kayla continued down the remaining block to Eastern Elementary. It wasn't far, 2 minutes at most, but for some reason, those 2 minutes had become the most terrifying stretch of Kayla's day. Danielle crouched down so she could look her baby in the eye. "You know you're safe, right? You know you can tell me anything." Kayla nodded, but her eyes flicked toward the end of the block, toward the school, toward something unseen. And then she whispered, barely audible even in the quiet morning, "Mommy, can you walk a little further today?" Danielle's heart stuttered. That wasn't normal. That wasn't nothing. That was fear speaking. "Of course," she murmured, "I'll walk all the way today." They continued, and Danielle felt Kayla inch even closer with each step. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for weeks. The bruises Kayla couldn't explain, the stomachaches every morning, the nightmares, the sudden drop in her grades, the fear so sharp she sometimes startled at shadows. It was more than bullying. Danielle knew the signs. She had been a social worker once. She knew what fear of this kind could do to a child. But she hadn't been able to get answers, not from Kayla, not from the school, not from the counselor who insisted that Kayla was quiet but well-adjusted. She didn't trust that. Not anymore. They approached the school gates, and that was when Danielle saw him, Mason Steele, a 5th grader bigger than most 7th graders. 2 of his friends stood behind him like loyal shadows. Mason wasn't looking at Kayla yet, but the moment he did, the moment his eyes darted over and locked on hers, Kayla flinched. Not just startled. Flinched. Like she'd been hit before. Danielle's breath went cold. Mason's grin was the kind that didn't belong on a child's face. Too old, too knowing, the grin of someone who believed he could do whatever he wanted. Because so far, he had. Danielle stepped slightly in front of Kayla, and Mason's grin flickered before returning sharper than before. He nudged one of his boys, whispering something. They laughed. Little giggles at first, then louder snickers, the kind meant to carry across the yard. Kayla's grip on Danielle's coat tightened. And that was the moment Danielle understood. This was the reason. This was the fear. This boy, and probably more like him, were behind the bruises and the nightmares and the silence. Danielle's voice dropped. "Kayla, has he been bothering you?" Kayla looked at the ground. "Can we go inside?" And those 5 small words told Danielle everything. Inside the building, the air felt different, stale, heavy, like it hadn't been breathed in properly. The front lobby was buzzing with kids, parents, backpacks, morning announcements. But none of that mattered. Danielle was replaying every warning sign, every change in her daughter's behavior. She signed Kayla in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "I'll be here after school. I love you." Kayla nodded, then drifted toward her classroom. Halfway down the hall, she stopped and looked back at her mother. That look, it wasn't a child's look. It was the look of someone hoping, praying that the day didn't bring more pain. Danielle waited until her daughter disappeared behind the classroom door, then walked straight to the principal's office. She wasn't asking anymore. She needed answers. But what she got instead was the same cold dismissal so many parents get when their child is small, quiet, or black. Principal Agron barely looked up from his computer when she entered. "Yes, Miss Bennett," he sighed like she was an inconvenience, not a concerned parent. Danielle explained everything, the bruises, the nightmares, the fear, the older boys hovering around her daughter, the dangerous look in that fifth grader's eyes. The principal's expression didn't change. "Ms. Bennett," he finally said, "kids exaggerate. Kayla is sensitive. She takes things to heart. Mason has no record of misconduct. I'm sure she's misreading normal childhood teasing." Danielle felt something inside her snap. "Normal," she repeated. "My daughter is terrified to go to school." She flinched when she saw that boy. Principal Agron leaned back, unimpressed. "We can't punish children based on feelings. If she wants to come talk to us, she's welcome to, but unless we witness something ourselves, our hands are tied." "Your hands are tied." Her hands were shaking. And Kayla was alone. Danielle walked out of that office stunned, furious, but most of all, terrified for her child. A mother knows when danger is close. A mother knows when something is coming. And something was coming. What Danielle didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her 7-year-old daughter was already planning her own way out, already imagining a world where someone, anyone, would take her fear seriously. Because later that week, Kayla would walk up to a group of bikers, the kind the whole town whispered about, and ask them a question so brave it would shake Easton to its core. A question no child should ever have to ask. A question that would change everything. That afternoon, the sky turned the dull, heavy gray of a cold November rain. Kayla waited at the end of the car line, her little backpack clutched close to her chest. Her eyes scanning every face, every corner, every shadow. She wasn't searching out of curiosity. She was searching because she was afraid. Her teacher dismissed the class one by one. "Have a good day, sweetheart," she said to Kayla with the same warm smile she gave every child. But her kindness faded the second Kayla stepped off school property and onto the sidewalk, because that was where they waited. Mason and his 2 friends stood under the basketball hoop, their backpacks thrown on the ground, their posture loose and cocky in a way that made Kayla's skin crawl. Boys aren't supposed to look like that at 11. Boys aren't supposed to have eyes that cold. The moment Kayla stepped into view, Mason's smile sharpened. "There she is," he muttered to his friends, "little Miss Crybaby." Kayla's stomach clenched. She pulled her hood up, shrinking inside her jacket the way she'd learned to, the way kids learn to do when adults dismiss their fear. Danielle's car was stuck in the line of minivans and SUVs. She waved through the windshield, trying to show Kayla she was close. But Kayla knew the truth, close wasn't the same as safe. Mason and the boys crossed the court slowly, deliberately, like a scene they'd rehearsed. Kayla's breath caught in her throat. She tried to walk toward her mom's car. She almost made it. But Mason stepped in front of her. "Where you going?" he asked, his voice low and mocking. Kayla tried to sidestep him, but one of the other boys moved too. They boxed her in, not touching her yet, but close, too close. Kids on the playground pretended not to see. Teachers were already gone. Parents were too far away. Mason bent down until he was inches from her face. "You gonna cry today too?" Kayla's eyes burned. She stared at the ground. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Leave me alone." "Oh, I'm sorry," he said in a cruel imitation of sympathy. "I didn't hear you." He cupped a hand to his ear. "Wanna say it louder?" She didn't answer. He stepped closer. And then suddenly, Kayla felt her backpack slide off her shoulder. Mason ripped it clean away and dumped it on the ground. Crayons scattered. Her tiny spiral notebook opened to a page filled with little drawings of cats and flowers. Mason stomped on it. The sound, the crack of crayons shattering, was louder than it should have been. Kayla's breath hitched. Her lip trembled. He saw it. He loved it. Oops, he sneered. The other two boys laughed. One nudged her backpack with his shoe, grinding dirt into the fabric. The other stepped on her drawing, a picture of her and her mom holding hands. Kayla bent down to grab it. That was when Mason shoved her shoulder hard. She stumbled, fell to her knees, scraped her palms on the rough pavement. Come on, Mason mocked, get up. That was when Danielle finally saw her baby girl on the ground, surrounded by boys larger than her, afraid and alone. Something inside her snapped. She threw the car into park and ran. Hey, she screamed, sprinting across the yard. Hey. The boys looked up. For a split second, Mason smirked, like the attention was part of the thrill. But when he saw the wildfire in Danielle's eyes, even he froze. Danielle dropped to her knees beside Kayla. Baby, are you okay? What did they do? What did they? But before she could finish, Mason muttered under his breath, she needs to toughen up anyway. Danielle heard it. Oh, she heard it. She stood slowly, stepping between Mason and her daughter. Her voice was low, shaking with fury. You ever put your hands on my child again, I swear. Ma'am, someone said behind her, you can't talk to students like that. Danielle turned sharply. It was Principal Agron. Of course it was. He didn't look at Mason. He didn't look at the bruises forming on Kayla's knees. He didn't look at the crushed drawing on the pavement. He looked at Danielle. As I said this morning, he said with deliberate calm, children sometimes overreact. If you escalate things, you'll only make it harder for Kayla socially. Danielle stared at him, stunned. Harder, harder, her voice cracked. She's being tormented. Agron sighed, as though he'd heard the complaint 1,000 times. This is playground conflict, Ms. Bennett. Nothing more. You need to stop dramatizing. Kayla flinched at the word dramatizing. It was the same one the counselor had used. The same tone the school had taken every time Danielle had tried to advocate for her child. Danielle's voice dropped to a whisper. Do you have any idea what this is doing to her? Before Agron could respond, Mason muttered, told you she was soft. Danielle turned, but not fast enough. Kayla heard it. She heard it loud and clear. And it broke something inside her. That evening at home, Kayla barely touched her dinner. She pushed peas around her plate, silent. Danielle watched her, worry building in her chest like a drumbeat. You wanna talk? Kayla shook her head. You wanna read tonight? No. You want me to call Grandma? Another no. Kayla finished her meal in silence, then quietly asked, Mommy, can I walk to school with someone else tomorrow? Danielle frowned. Who do you mean, baby? A friend? A teacher? Kayla's small hands twisted in her lap. No, someone bigger, someone who scares the scary people. Danielle paused, unsure what Kayla meant. Like who? Kayla looked toward the window, toward the street lights, toward a memory she hadn't spoken of in weeks. A memory from a Saturday morning grocery run when she'd seen a group of leather-vested bikers helping an elderly man cross the street. People had stared. People had whispered. But the bikers had been gentle, kind, protective. I know who can help, Kayla whispered. Danielle blinked. Help with what? Kayla looked up, and her voice trembled as it broke free. Mommy, I want someone to walk me to school, so I can feel safe. Danielle's heart sank into her stomach. Because no 7-year-old should ever have to say those words. Not ever. And she didn't know it yet, she couldn't have known, but her daughter was about to make a decision that would shake the entire town. Because before dawn the next morning, Kayla Bennett, small, quiet, brave little Kayla, would cross the street alone, walk toward a group of bikers outside Ray's diner, and ask a question that would change everything. A question that would turn fear into a movement. A question that would expose a rotten truth this town had ignored far too long. And what came next would shake Eastern Pennsylvania to its core. The next morning broke colder than the one before. The November sky was still ink-dark at 6:10 a.m., the street lamps casting long shadows across Easton's quiet blocks. Most kids were still asleep, tucked under warm blankets, dreaming kid dreams, but not Kayla Bennett. She woke before her alarm, before her mother, before most of the town. Fear does that to children. It wakes them early. It sits at the foot of their beds. It follows them into their shoes as they tie the laces with shaking fingers. Kayla slipped out of bed. She already wore yesterday's jeans and a hoodie. She'd slept in them, afraid she might lose her nerve if she woke up and had to change clothes first. Her dinosaur backpack waited by the door, the zipper still bent from Mason stepping on it. She didn't touch it. Instead, she walked to the window. Outside, the street was empty. The world was wrapped in a soft, eerie stillness, the kind that usually comforts people. But for Kayla, silence had become something else. Silence meant danger could hide inside it. Silence meant no one was around to see what happened. But today, she needed silence. Because silence was the only thing that could hide her plan. She grabbed her coat, opened the apartment front door, and stepped into the cold hallway. Her breath puffed out in little clouds. She hesitated. She loved her mother more than anything. Danielle was her hero, the one who worked double shifts at the nursing home, the one who always made sure Kayla had warm socks and her favorite cereal. But when the adults who are supposed to help don't listen, kids learn to solve problems alone. Kayla pulled the door shut behind her. Danielle woke to the sound of the apartment door clicking closed. She sat up fast, the kind of instinct only a worried parent has. "Kayla," she called. "Silence." She ran to the door. It was locked from the outside. Her heart dropped. She grabbed her keys and phone and bolted downstairs. But Kayla was already a block away. Kayla's little boots hit the sidewalk with determination far bigger than her body. She kept her hands tucked into her sleeves, both from the cold and from nerves. Every step felt too loud. Every distant car sounded like it might be the black SUV she feared, the one she'd seen idling near school, the one Mason's older cousin drove, the one no one believed followed her. But she kept walking. 4 blocks. Just 4. She counted them in her head like a mantra. Past the bakery, whose windows were still dark. Past the laundromat, humming quietly under fluorescent lights. Past the empty bus stop, where the bench always collected more frost than snow. And then finally, she saw them. Ray's Diner. The neon sign flickered pink and blue in the early dawn, lighting up the row of motorcycles parked out front. There were 7 of them, big, heavy beasts of chrome and leather, lined up like sleeping animals. To most people in town, that sight meant trouble. These bikers were whispered about. They were the kind of men people crossed the street to avoid. Kayla had seen them twice before. Both times she'd watched them help people quietly without being asked. The way one helped an older woman struggling with grocery bags. The way another held the door open for a man on crutches. Power didn't scare Kayla. Cruelty did. And these men, they hadn't seemed cruel. She took a breath so shaky she could hear it. Then pushed open the diner door. The bell above chimed. And the room fell silent. 7 heads turned. 7 sets of eyes, tired, weathered, curious, locked onto the tiny girl in a purple hoodie and too big coat. Kayla swallowed, then stepped forward. The biggest man sat at the counter. His leather vest was lined with pins and patches. His beard was gray with streaks of white. His arms looked like they carried whole lives of burden. He watched her approach, eyebrows lifting slightly. Kayla stopped in front of him. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat, loud, echoing in her ears, faster than she could steady it. The man's voice broke the silence gently. "Mornin', little one, you lost." Kayla shook her head. She opened her mouth. No sound came out. She tried again. This time her voice quivered, tiny but determined. Can you walk me to school today?" The diner froze. Forks stopped mid-air. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Conversations died instantly. The man blinked slowly, as though trying to understand what he just heard. "Sweetheart," he said, lowering his tone even softer, "why would you need us to walk you to school?" Kayla's eyes filled. But she did not cry. Because this wasn't weakness. This was courage. "They're hurting me," she whispered. "The boys at school, and someone in a car." Her breath hitched. "Nobody will listen. Nobody believes me. I just want to feel safe." The words came out like tiny shards of broken glass, fragile, painful, and years too early for a child to speak. The man inhaled sharply. Behind him, another biker muttered, "Jesus Christ." Another set down his coffee. A woman in a booth covered her mouth. Kayla stood there trembling, not because she was weak, but because she'd run out of places to hide her fear. And sometimes, the bravest thing a child can do is speak. The big man rose from his stool. Slowly, so slowly. Not to frighten her, not to tower over her, but to kneel, one knee on the checkerboard tile floor, so he could look her in the eye. "What's your name, little one?" he asked. "Kayla," she whispered. "Kayla," he repeated, like he needed to feel the sound of it. "I'm Bear." Of course, that was his name. It fit him, huge, strong, protective. Bear rested one calloused hand over his heart. "You did the bravest thing a kid can do," he said quietly, asking for help. Kayla's lip trembled again. "Do you want us to walk with you today?" he asked. She nodded. Bear nodded back. And in that moment, the air inside Ray's diner changed. Thickened. Sharpened. Focused. 7 bikers sat up straighter. 7 faces hardened with purpose. Because nothing in this world moves grown men faster than a child saying, "I'm scared." What Kayla didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was that she had just set off a chain reaction Easton had never seen. Because Bear wasn't just a biker. He was the president of the Eastern Guardians Motorcycle Club, a group of veterans, blue-collar workers, ex-firefighters, and former first responders who ran food drives and protected the forgotten parts of town. And when a child asks a guardian for safety, that child becomes protected. Period. Bear stood, turning to the others. "We ride," he said. No explanation. No hesitation. No debate. The men and women rose as one. And Kayla Bennett, 7 years old, afraid and brave at the same time, felt the room shift into something she hadn't felt in weeks. Strength. Quiet, unquestioning strength. What she didn't know yet was that this wasn't just a walk to school. This was the beginning of a storm. A reckoning. A moment that would turn whispers into headlines and shake the foundations of Easton's schools, politics, and institutions. Because today, 7 bikers would walk her to class. Tomorrow, the whole town would hear the truth she had carried alone. Bear rose from the diner floor with a steadiness that made even the silverware seem to pause. His eyes, once soft with concern, had hardened into something else entirely. Not anger, not yet, but something deeper, something protective. "Kayla," he said gently, "I need you to sit right here for a minute, okay? I gotta make a couple calls." She nodded, her small frame trembling under the weight of everything she'd just said out loud. Bear looked toward the booth in the back where two other riders sat, Diesel and Mama Joe. Diesel was massive and quiet, Mama Joe, a retired EMT with a voice like warm bread. Both were watching Kayla with the kind of concern you only see from people who have seen too much pain in their lives. Mama Joe slid into the empty seat beside Kayla and offered her a cup of hot chocolate. "Honey, you sit with me, you don't worry about a thing, you hear me." Kayla nodded again, fingers curling around the warm mug. Outside, the sky was slowly turning from night to grey-blue dawn. The world was waking up, but inside Ray's diner, time felt suspended, hanging in the air between the clink of cups and the low hum of the refrigerator. Bear stepped outside and pulled out his phone. The door shut behind him, and silence swallowed the room. Kayla watched him through the window. She couldn't hear his words, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. He was speaking with his hands, wide gestures, sharp motions, moments where he paused, tilting his head like he was listening hard. And then she saw it. He nodded once, slow and certain. The kind of nod that changes things. Inside the diner, Diesel's phone buzzed, then Tank, then Mama Joe's. One after another, everyone reached for their devices. Notifications lit up screens like sparks in a dark room. Mama Joe's eyes widened. "Oh, they're coming." "They?" Kayla asked softly. Mama Joe squeezed her hand. "You'll see, baby, you'll see soon." Kayla didn't understand yet. She didn't know that Bear's call wasn't to a friend. It was to dozens of riders across Eastern and even beyond it. See, the Guardians weren't just a club. They were a network, a family that stretched across counties and states. When a Guardian said, "A child is in danger," the response wasn't casual. It wasn't optional. It was immediate. Outside, in the thin November light, Bear finally walked back in. "All right," he said quietly, "we're gonna take her in." Diesel nodded. "2 riders or 3? Bear looked at Kayla, sitting small in the booth with her hot chocolate, trying so hard not to cry. 7, Bear said. The table went still. 7 riders for 1 child. That wasn't an escort. That was a statement. Mama Joe whispered, "Bear, that might draw attention." "That's the point." His voice was calm but ice-cold. "If the school and the police won't protect her, the whole damn town is gonna see who will." Kayla didn't know the weight of those words. But the adults did. And the silence that followed was heavy, the kind of heavy that fills a room with awareness, with unspoken promises, with a kind of thunder you feel before you hear it. At 7:01 a.m., the first motorcycle arrived. Then another. Then another. Engines rumbled like distant thunder, shaking the diner windows. Kayla's eyes widened as she turned to the sound. Outside, the parking lot filled with bikes. Big ones, loud ones, shiny chrome and matte black. Veterans, mechanics, fathers, grandmothers. Riders with flags, riders with patched jackets, riders who looked like they walked out of Road Legends. 7 became 10. 10 became 15. 15 became 23. Kayla pressed her palms to the glass. Are they all here for me?" she asked in a trembling voice. Mama Joe put an arm around her shoulders. "Honey, they're here because you asked for help, and you asked bravely." Kayla's throat tightened. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Outside, Bear stepped forward and raised his hand. The rumble of engines quieted, not silent, but unified. A low purr of power. A wall of strength. A promise made loud. Bear opened the diner door. "Kayla," he said softly, "you ready?" She hesitated only a moment, the kind of moment a child spends deciding whether she will let bravery win over fear. She nodded. Bear knelt again, offering his hand. "Then let's get you to school." Kayla placed her tiny hand in his massive one. The diner watched in reverent silence as Bear led her outside. The morning air hit her cheeks, cold and sharp, but she wasn't alone in it. The bikers parted as she stepped out, a corridor of leather and steel, eyes soft but alert. You could feel the shift in the air. The riders weren't angry, but they were focused. Protective. Ready. Bear lifted a small helmet, glossy black, with a sticker of a sunflower on the side. Mama Joe had decorated it years ago for club events. He placed it gently on Kayla's head. There you go, he said. Perfect fit. Kayla touched the sunflower decal and smiled the smallest, sweetest smile. Bear lifted her up and settled her onto the seat of his bike. Tank and Diesel stood on each side, adjusting the footrests so her boots wouldn't slip. Diesel asked, "You ever been on a motorcycle before?" Kayla shook her head. "You're gonna love it," he said with a grin. "Feels like flying." Bear climbed behind her, steady and solid, one large hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "All right," he called out to the line of riders, "form up." Engines revved. 23 motorcycles shifted into formation, a rolling shield around a single child. The sun peeked over the horizon as if to watch. Kayla's heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from something new. Something that felt like strength, like a promise, like protection. Bear leaned close and whispered into her helmet, "You're safe, little one." And the quiet power of those words settled into her bones, warm and steady. At 7:14 a.m., the convoy pulled out. Slow, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The town had never seen anything like it. Neighbors stepped onto porches. Joggers slowed their pace. Drivers rolled down windows. Phones rose in the air to record. But no camera could capture the look on Kayla's face. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she wasn't shrinking. She wasn't flinching. She wasn't hiding. She was held safely between the thunder of motorcycles and the quiet strength of a community that had finally, miraculously, listened. Today, she would walk into school protected. Tomorrow, the whole town would know why. And then, the truth would shake Easton to its core. The convoy reached the intersection of Laurel and 3rd Street at 7:22 a.m., the same corner where Kayla usually paused, tense and trembling, before walking the last block alone. But today, she arrived surrounded by thunder. Engines rumbled like a rolling storm behind her. 23 motorcycles, moving in slow, unified precision, filled the streets with a sound so steady and powerful it quieted the morning itself. Bear's arm rested gently around her from behind, guiding the bike with the other hand. Kayla sat up straighter than any 7-year-old ever had, her sunflower helmet tilted just slightly as she looked around at the world that suddenly felt different, safer, brighter, wider. Diesel rode to their right, Mama Joe to their left. Tank and Hawk covered the rear. The rest formed a loose but unmistakably protective perimeter around Bear's bike. Residents stepped outside in pajamas and slippers. Coffee mugs froze halfway to lips. People whispered to each other. "What's going on? Is it a protest? Is someone famous in town? Who's the kid?" But then they saw the child clutching her backpack, small hands gripping the sides of Bear's vest. And the whispers changed. "Oh my God, she's scared. Something happened. Who hurt her? Why does a little girl need all that?" Truth travels fast in a small town, even before it's spoken. And before the convoy reached Easton Elementary, phones were already recording, videos already posted, comments already flooding in. "This is insane. What happened to her? Those bikers look serious. God bless them for protecting that baby." Bear didn't look at any of the cameras. He looked at the school. And that was where the real turning point began. When the convoy turned onto the school block, the sight was impossible to miss. Parents double-parked their cars, kids stopped mid-step, teachers on morning duty froze with their walkie-talkies halfway to their mouths. 23 motorcycles with their lights still on, engines humming deep, powerful, synchronized, and at the front of them all, a little black girl in a sunflower helmet. Bear parked his bike directly in front of the school steps. He turned the key. The engine quieted into a low ticking sound, the heartbeat of cooling metal. One by one, the others shut off their bikes too, until the entire block fell into a strained, unbelievable silence. A silence that had weight. A silence that made the air feel tighter. A silence that demanded answers. Bear carefully lifted Kayla off the seat and set her on the ground. She kept hold of his vest, steadying herself as the crowd stared. Parents gasped, kids pointed, whispers multiplied. Kayla's heart hammered. But she didn't shrink this time. She didn't hide behind her hair. She stood beside Bear, her tiny hand resting against the leather of his vest, a vest that bore the Guardian's emblem, a shield, a pair of wings, and the words, "Honor above all." Principal Agron burst through the front doors like a man trying to get ahead of a story. His tie was crooked, and he was breathing too hard for someone who had only walked 20 feet. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "You can't bring motorcycles onto school property. This is inappropriate. This is." Bear cut him a look so cold, so steady, so utterly unafraid that Agron stopped mid-sentence. The bikers didn't move. Not one of them. 23 figures standing perfectly still. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Bear lowered himself into a crouch beside Kayla again. "Do you want to go inside, little one?" he asked softly. Kayla looked up at him, then at the school, then at the doors where Mason and his two friends had just appeared, eyes wide, steps faltering. They weren't brave today. Kayla's breath shook, but she nodded, yes. Bear rose, and something changed in the atmosphere. He wasn't just a biker now. He was a force. He placed a hand on Kayla's shoulder and began walking her toward the entrance. Diesel and Mama Joe flanked them. The others formed a respectful perimeter. Parents moved aside. Teachers stepped back. Students stared like they were witnessing something legendary. Halfway to the steps, Principal Agron regained some of his nerve. "Sir, I cannot allow this." Bear stopped walking, turned slowly, and fixed the principal with a look that did not need words. But he gave him words anyway, quiet, controlled, devastating. "She asked for protection, we're giving it." Agron swallowed. "I understand you mean well, but this is disrupting school functions and—" Mama Joe stepped forward, her voice steady as steel. "Disrupting school functions. Baby, the only thing disrupting this school is the fear this child has been living with while y'all looked the other way." Agron stiffened. "We have everything under control. Children exaggerate. We cannot take action based on." Diesel barked a laugh, a humorless, sharp sound that made several teachers flinch. "Everything under control," he repeated. "Then why'd she come to us instead of you?" Agron opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because that wasn't a question. It was an indictment. And everyone standing there knew it. Parents began murmuring. "This school doesn't listen. My kid said they ignore bullying too. This has been happening. Kayla came here for help. And nobody believed her." Agron's face turned pink. "We handle all reports with professional." Bear stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Agron would hear it, but Kayla heard the power in it too. "She trusted you, you dismissed her." A pause. A 7-year-old had to find strangers to feel safe. Agron's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, the sputtering sound of a man realizing too late that the world had just seen him for what he was. And then, the doors behind Agron swung open again. "Mason!" He froze when he saw Kayla, when he saw Bear, when he saw 23 bikers lined up like an army. He shrank back just a step, but everyone saw it. And that one flinch, that one unconscious recall of guilt and fear, was the spark that lit the powder keg. Bear's eyes shifted to him. Slowly, deliberately, and Mason looked away. Quickly, shamefully. That was the moment the crowd understood the truth. No rumor, no exaggeration, no misunderstanding. That boy was the reason a child came to a biker club for safety. Parents gasped. Students whispered. Teachers stiffened. And the weight of silence in that moment was louder than any engine. Then Bear said the words that would change everything. "Kayla, tell them what happened." The world froze. Mama Jo put a hand on Kayla's back, warm and steady. "We are right here, baby." Kayla took a shaky breath. She looked at Mason, then at Principal Agron, then at the crowd. Her voice was so small but so brave that it cut through the cold morning like an arrow. "They hit me," she swallowed, "and they follow me in a car. A tremor. I told the school and nobody listened." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Parents turned furious eyes toward the principal. Teachers looked horrified. Students stared at Mason and his friends like they'd suddenly changed shape. And Principal Agron, he paled. Because this time, everyone heard her. Everyone believed her. Everyone saw the truth. And once people see the truth, really see it, there's no going back. Kayla lowered her gaze, tears glistening in her eyes. Bear bent slightly toward her. "You did good," he murmured. And the moment he said that, phones went up. Teachers whispered into radios. Parents demanded answers. And in the middle of all of it stood a 7-year-old girl who had finally been heard. This was no longer a walk to school. This was the turning point. The moment the town of Easton realized something was deeply wrong, not with a child, but with the adults who failed her. The reckoning was coming. And when it arrived, no one in Easton would be able to look away. The school courtyard had become a frozen photograph, the kind that captures a moment right before everything changes. Kayla's words hung in the air like smoke. You could see the shock settle on faces. You could see the anger rise in others. You could feel the guilt crawling across Principal Agron's expression, guilt he didn't want, didn't expect, didn't know how to hide. Silence swallowed the block. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then it happened. A single parent stepped forward. Mrs. Ramirez, mother of a 4th grader, spoke up, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My daughter said the boys mess with the younger kids all the time. She came home scared last month, and this school said it was playground conflict, too." Murmurs rippled outward. Then another parent. Then another. "I reported something, and nothing was done. My son said the same boys shove kids near the bathrooms. They always protect the older boys. This school doesn't listen." Agron tried to regain control. "Please, please, let's not turn this into a spectacle. These are private matters and—" Bear stepped forward. Not aggressively, not threateningly, but with a presence that was impossible to ignore. He handed Agron a folded piece of paper, crisp, clean, printed with something official-looking. Agron frowned and opened it. His face drained of color. "What is?" he began. "It's our report," Bear said evenly, "filed with the district superintendent at 6:45 this morning, copied to the school board, copied to the county DA's office." A collective gasp spread. Agron's voice cracked. DA's office, over what? Over rumors. Bear tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving Agron's. Over a 7-year-old saying she's being stalked in a car. The crowd bristled. That detail had not been public. Not until Kayla whispered it minutes earlier. Not until now, when Bear repeated it with the weight of law behind it. Mama Jo added, and over the fact that she said she told y'all more than once. Agron stuttered, I wasn't informed of, I didn't know. You were told, Danielle's voice cut in. Everyone turned. Danielle Bennett walked through the crowd, breathless from running, coat half-zipped, her hand clutching her car keys so tightly her knuckles were white. But her eyes were blazing. She pushed through parents, past teachers, past students until she reached her daughter. Kayla flung herself into her mother's arms. Danielle dropped to her knees, holding her baby like she was made of glass and flame at the same time. Oh baby, what were you thinking leaving like that? You scared me to death. But even as she whispered it, Danielle understood. Kayla hadn't left because she didn't trust her mother. She had left because she no longer trusted the school. Bear stepped back as mother and daughter clung to each other. He respected that bond too much to interrupt it. But Principal Agron didn't. He cleared his throat. Ms. Bennett, please control your child. This situation is becoming dangerously exaggerated. We must maintain. Danielle rose slowly. Very slowly. The crowd went silent like someone flipped a switch. Control my child, she repeated. Agron faltered, I only meant. No, Danielle took a step toward him. You meant exactly what you said. You've been dismissing her fear for weeks. You dismissed me when I tried to warn you. You dismissed her bruises. You dismissed the older boys following her. Her voice rose, not yelling, just undeniable. And now you want to dismiss this too. Agron's mouth opened and closed like a man drowning. Danielle pointed at Mason. Look at him, and tell me you didn't know something was happening. Mason's bravado cracked like cheap glass. He stepped back instinctively, that single step exposing everything. Kids don't step back from lies. They step back from truth. The moment stretched. Then Bear's voice, low, measured, rolled across the courtyard. We are not here to fight. We're not here to threaten. A beat. We are here because a child did everything right, and adults did everything wrong. The words hit like a hammer. And then, as if the universe wanted to emphasize the point, a police cruiser turned the corner. Then another, blue lights flashing silently in the early dawn. Parents gasped. Teachers straightened. Agron blanched. The cruisers stopped in front of the school. Doors opened. 2 officers stepped out. Officer Grant, a tall black man with tired eyes but a steady posture, approached first. Behind him, Officer Lively, a younger white woman who had a reputation for actually listening to kids. Morning, folks, Grant said calmly. We got several calls this morning. Someone wanna explain. Agron stepped forward quickly. Officers, I assure you this is a misunderstanding. Grant raised a hand. A simple gesture. But firm. We'll hear from the child first. Agron froze. Grant crouched slightly, softening his voice. Kayla, sweetheart, do you want to tell us what's been going on? Kayla squeezed her mother's hand. She looked at Bear. At Mama Jo. At Diesel. At the riders standing tall behind her. And for the first time, she didn't whisper. They hurt me, she said clearly, and they follow me from school in a black car. Grant exhaled. Lively pulled out her notebook. Can you describe the car? Lively asked gently. Kayla nodded. Black, the windows are dark, and it has a loud engine. Grant and Lively exchanged a look, meaningful, alert. Grant turned to Mason. Son, you know anything about this? Mason swallowed hard. Aye. His eyes darted to Bear. Then to the officers. Then to Agron. He deflated. My cousin, he mumbled. He drives a black car. He said we could scare the little kids, just a little. He said it was funny. A ripple of horror moved across the crowd. Even Agron looked stunned. But then Grant asked the question that ripped the truth wide open. Does your cousin pick you up after school? Mason nodded slowly. What's your cousin's name? Mason hesitated, then whispered the name. Officer Grant's expression changed. It hardened, sharpened, turned into something deadly serious. Because the name Mason spoke belonged to a man already on a quiet watch list. A man with prior complaints. Someone police had been keeping an eye on. Grant straightened. All right, Officers Ramirez and O'Donnell are already en route to his address. Agron stammered, this can't be, we didn't. Officer Lively turned to him calmly. Sir, when a child reports being followed, you're required to file a report. Did you? Agron froze. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone knew the truth. Danielle's shoulders sagged as the weight of weeks, maybe months, finally came loose. She hugged Kayla close. Mama Jo placed a steady hand on her back. Bear stepped beside Grant. Officer, Bear said quietly, we'll stay until she's safely inside. Grant nodded. We appreciate that. Truth is, some of these kids needed to see adults show up for the right reasons. A slow murmur of agreement moved through the crowd. The turning point wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It wasn't chaotic. It was the moment the town realized. A 7-year-old had been fighting a battle alone. And when she finally asked for help, it wasn't the school or the system that responded. It was strangers who listened. Strangers who believed her. Strangers who stood up. The guardians didn't have badges. They didn't have titles. They didn't have permission. They had compassion. And compassion, real compassion, changes things. Bear turned to Kayla and knelt once more. You did everything right, he said softly. Kayla wiped her cheek. I wasn't brave, I was scared. Bear rested a giant hand over her small one. Being scared, he said, and still speaking up, that's the bravest thing a person can do. Kayla breathed out slowly. The tiniest smile touched her lips. And the town of Easton, gathered in the cold morning air, knew they had just witnessed something bigger than bikes, bigger than bullies, bigger than fear. They had witnessed the moment truth finally walked through the front door. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same after this. Reckonings don't always arrive with shouting or fists or flashing lights. Sometimes they arrive quietly like a ripple. A murmur. A pulse moving through a town that suddenly realizes it has been asleep for far too long. That was Easton. The moment Mason's confession fell into the open, the town felt the shift. It wasn't dramatic, just a collective tightening, a hush rolling across the school grounds like winter wind. People looked around differently, at the kids, at the teachers, at the building they trusted, at each other. And at Kayla, a tiny girl with a sunflower painted on her helmet, standing at the center of a storm she never asked for. Bear placed a protective hand near her shoulder as Officer Grant and Officer Lively moved toward the school entrance with purpose. Mason and his two friends were escorted gently but firmly to the office, their earlier bravado drained away like rain down a storm gutter. Parents stepped back, murmuring low. This is bad. This went on for weeks. How did nobody notice? My kid said something too, but I thought, Lord, that poor baby. For the first time in a long time, the truth didn't feel hidden or dismissed. It felt alive. It moved. It spread. And nothing can outrun truth once people start speaking it out loud. Officer Lively turned to Bear quietly. Do you and your riders mind sticking around for a bit? We'll need statements. Bear nodded. We're not going anywhere. Mama Joe lifted Kayla's hood and brushed a curl from her forehead. You okay, sweetheart? Kayla nodded, but her eyes stayed locked on the school doors, half expecting Mason to come running out again, half afraid the silence meant trouble was coming. Danielle crouched beside her. I'm here now, she murmured. I got you. But even as she said the words, her voice held a tremor. Because every mother knows. Even when you're holding your child, fear doesn't instantly disappear. It takes truth, and justice, and time. Inside the school, chaos rippled in hushed tones. Teachers whispered in hallways. Staff exchanged tight, uneasy looks. A few aides peered out the window at the motorcycles lined up outside like guardians out of an old legend. Principal Agron paced in tight circles in his office, tugging at his tie as officers asked questions he didn't know how to answer without implicating himself. When a child reports harassment, Officer Lively repeated, calm but firm, you're required to create a written record. Where is that documentation? Agron wiped his forehead. I didn't believe the reports were credible. That isn't your decision, Grant said. It's your duty to file them. Agron's lips pressed into a thin, panicked line. Officer Grant pulled out a folder. A slim but damning folder. We already spoke to 2 parents last week, he said, and a lunch aide. He laid the papers down. Seems Kayla's fear was noted, but ignored. Agron's voice cracked. I thought she was exaggerating. She's a sensitive kid and… Grant's tone sharpened. Sensitive kids still deserve safety. Agron froze. In that instant, he realized the thing most administrators only learn too late. Neglect is a type of action. And action has consequences. Outside, the reckoning was beginning its own journey, not in the school office, but in the hands of dozens of parents who had their cameras out. Videos uploaded at 7:24 a.m. Comments already flooding in. Hashtags forming like storm clouds. Protect our kids. Listen to black children. Guardians at Eastern. People across town woke to the footage. Kayla on the motorcycle. The wall of bikers behind her. Her soft voice saying, they hurt me. And the reactions poured out in waves. Heartbreaking. How did this happen? Where were the adults? Bless those bikers. The truth was no longer confined to the courtyard. It was now in living rooms, workplaces, phones buzzing on countertops, community group chats lighting up like wildfire. The story wasn't waiting for permission. It was moving. Mama Joe noticed the tension in Bear's shoulders as he watched the door. He wasn't packing. He wasn't glaring. He wasn't doing anything aggressive. He was standing still. A kind of still that says someone is holding back 1,000 storms. You okay? She asked. Bear didn't look away from the building. No child should ever have to fight this alone, he said quietly. Mama Joe sighed. Too many do. Behind them, a mother holding her toddler approached Danielle cautiously. I just want to say thank you for speaking up, she said. My son told me something similar happened to him last year, but I didn't know what to do. Seeing you here, it makes me feel braver too. Danielle blinked hard. I shouldn't have had to be brave for this, she whispered. I just wanted them to listen. And now they have to, the mother said. The words hung in the air. Now they have to. That was the essence of a reckoning. Not rage, not revenge, but accountability. People finally seeing what they ignored. People admitting what they denied. People reckoning with the harm caused by silence. At 7:46 a.m., Officer Grant stepped out of the building. People instantly hushed. Even the wind stilled. Grant approached Bear and Danielle. "We are taking action," he said. "The cousin is being brought in for questioning, and Ms. Bennett," he looked Danielle in the eyes, "the school will be reviewing its failure to respond to your reports." Danielle nodded, but her jaw trembled. Relief mixed with rage, mixed with exhaustion. "What about Mason and the other boys?" she asked. "They'll be interviewed with their guardians," Grant said, "but the more serious issue is the adult involved, and the school's negligence." Bear crossed his arms. "That enough to keep her safe today?" Grant paused. "Not yet," he said honestly. "That's why we're here." Then he looked at the guardians. "And why I'm glad you are too." Diesel gave the smallest nod, respect between protectors. Mama Jo placed her hands on Kayla's shoulders. "Sweetheart, how you feeling?" Kayla looked up, small, tired, but steadier. Like I can breathe again," she whispered. Bear closed his eyes for a moment, letting those words land deep. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives when a child says 4 simple words. "I can breathe again." Because breathing is what fear steals first, and what safety restores. But the reckoning wasn't done. Because inside the school, staff were gathering, whispering, exchanging looks that said more than words ever could. "We failed her. We ignored too much. This is going to get ugly. We need to fix this. We should have listened." The truth had cracked open the walls tightly built around routine, dismissal, and indifference. And once the walls crack, they don't stop breaking. At least not until everything hidden behind them comes tumbling into the light. Officer Grant turned toward the group one last time. "We'll be updating everyone soon. For now, Bear, if you and your riders plan to escort her inside, we'll walk with you." Bear nodded. Danielle looked down at her daughter. "You ready, baby?" Kayla took a breath. A deep one. "I'm ready," she said quietly. Her small hand slipped into her mother, and her other into Bear. The 3 of them, mother, child, guardian, began walking toward the school doors. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic, just steps. But those steps echoed like a drumbeat, like the beginning of justice, like the start of change, like the sound of a reckoning finally arriving. Everyone watched, and for the first time, the whole town was looking in the right direction. The doors opened with a slow, weighted groan, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy, like the building itself understood that something inside it was being broken open and reshaped forever. Bear walked on Kayla's right side, Danielle on her left, and 2 officers followed close behind. The remaining riders stood like a silent wall at the sidewalk, their presence steady and immovable. Inside, the hallway felt different. Children whispered. Teachers paused mid-step. A few staff members stepped aside respectfully, their faces tight with a mixture of guilt and awakening. Not fear. Accountability. For the first time, adults looked at Kayla not as a child overreacting. Not as a problem to smooth over. Not as a story to dismiss. But as a little girl who should have never had to be this brave. Kayla's steps were small, careful, the steps of someone who has walked this path with dread for weeks, preparing herself for hurt at every corner. But this time, she wasn't alone. Bear scanned the hallway like a guardian lion. Danielle kept her voice low and soothing, whispering reminders that her daughter was safe, that she was loved, that she wasn't walking into fear anymore, but into truth. Kids stopped at their lockers, eyes widening. That's her. The girl from the video. She had bikers with her. Man, they really let her go through all that. And not a single child said it with mockery. Only awe, and guilt, and respect. Because sometimes even children understand injustice better than the adults they learn from. Principal Agron appeared at the far end of the hallway, stiff and pale. His eyes darted between the officers, Danielle, Bear, and the tiny girl his negligence had put in danger. He attempted a smile, thin, shaky, wrong. "Miss Bennett, Kayla, Danielle didn't say a word. The silence between them was louder than anything she could have spoken. Officer Grant stepped in front of them. "Principal Agron, we'll speak in your office shortly. For now, we're escorting Kayla to her classroom." Agron swallowed and nodded, stepping aside. The act, that small, unsteady sidestep, was the first time since the school year began that he moved out of Kayla's way, instead of forcing her to navigate around him like her fear was inconvenient. Small actions carried truths, and that one carried plenty. As they continued down the hall, a tiny voice suddenly broke through the hush. "Kayla." It was a girl, small, brown-skinned, pigtails, wearing a backpack covered in stickers. She stepped forward, hands clasped nervously. I'm sorry I didn't say something," she whispered. "I saw them be mean to you. I was scared too." Kayla looked at her, eyes soft. "It's okay," she said quietly. "I get scared a lot." The little girl nodded, tears forming. "But I won't be quiet again." Something gentle passed between them, the fragile courage of children learning how to stand up for one another. Danielle had to turn away for a moment, swallowing emotion. Bear placed a hand over his heart, a small, respectful gesture. Officer Lively stepped forward. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Amira," she whispered. "You did the right thing today," Lively said. Amira smiled shyly and stepped back as Kayla continued forward. Justice isn't a courtroom word. Sometimes it's a child promising not to stay silent anymore. They reached Kayla's classroom. Ms. Ward, her teacher, stood in the doorway, eyes red, hands wrung together with the guilt of someone who realized too late that kindness doesn't erase responsibility. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. Kayla hesitated, inching closer to Danielle's leg. "Baby," Danielle said softly, "you don't have to go in if you don't want to. We'll walk back out. Nobody decides for you today, you call it." Kayla looked up, breathing slow. "I wanna try," she said. And that was bravery, not big, loud, heroic. Quiet, shaky. A child deciding fear would not win. Ms. Ward stepped aside. "Take your time, sweetheart. Your desk is clean, your seat's waiting." Danielle kneeled, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "You're stronger than you know," she whispered. Kayla hugged her tightly, then turned to Bear. "Will you be here after school too?" Bear smiled gently, a smile that could move mountains if you asked it to. "We ride when you need us," he said, "every time." Her little shoulders loosened, the first sign of ease. She walked inside. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then Kayla sat down at her desk, not trembling, not shrinking, not folding into herself. Just sitting. Just being a child again. And that was victory. As the door closed softly behind her, Danielle exhaled, a long, shaking breath she'd been holding for weeks. Grant placed a hand on her back. "You did everything right," he said. "No," she said softly, "I did everything I could, and that wasn't enough, not until now." Bear's voice came low and steady. "But you kept fighting, that's why she's safe today." Mama Joe added, "And she ain't ever walking alone again." Danielle looked at them, this unexpected family forged through fear, courage, and truth. "Thank you," she whispered, "all of you." Diesel tapped his chest once. "She's one of ours now." But the reckoning wasn't finished. Outside, the videos continued to spread. Parents demanded emergency meetings. Staff sent emails admitting concerns they'd ignored. The district superintendent arrived before noon. And at the center of it all, one 7-year-old girl finally felt safe enough to raise her hand in class again. Safe enough to smile. Safe enough to breathe. Safe enough to be a child instead of a target. That was the real shake that hit the town, not the bikers, not the outrage, not the investigation. But the realization that a child shouldn't need a motorcycle escort for adults to protect her. Easton felt that. The whole town felt that. And it changed something deeper than rules or procedures. It changed hearts. It forced people to look at their own silence. It forced them to choose who they wanted to be, the ones who ignored the problem, or the ones who stood up. Most towns never get that wake-up call. Easton did. And it would never be the same again. Because Truth had walked into school that morning on 2 feet, holding hands with courage. And justice followed right behind. The school day ended under a sky washed clean by afternoon light. Soft gold poured over Easton, settling into the cracks of sidewalks, glinting on windshields, warming the cold corners where fear once lived. For the first time in weeks, Kayla didn't dread the final bell. She packed her crayons, zipped her backpack, and walked toward the door with a steadiness she had almost forgotten she possessed. Her heart wasn't racing, her hands weren't shaking. Safety feels different when you've lived without it. It feels like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. When she stepped outside, she froze, not from fear but from awe. The Guardians were back. Not 23 this time. Maury. Their motorcycles lined the street like a protective wall stretching from one corner to the next. Engines silent, riders standing tall, vests catching the sunlight like armor. A few held small handmade signs. Stand with KIDS. Listen. Enough. And right in front of the line was Bear, his arms crossed loosely, a soft smile beneath his silver beard. Kayla ran to him, tiny steps pattering against pavement, and he knelt low to catch her in a careful hug. You had a good day, he asked. She nodded against his shoulder. I did. Danielle approached, still overwhelmed by this new reality, this community rising so fiercely for her child. Y'all didn't have to come back, she whispered. Bear stood, we know. Diesel smirked, but you didn't think we were just gonna drop her off in the morning and vanish, did you? Mama Joe added, this ain't a one-way trip, protection comes full circle. Kayla reached for her mother's hand, Danielle squeezed back. Behind them, parents recorded videos, murmuring admiration, gratitude, disbelief. Some wiped tears. Some walked up to the riders to shake hands. Some hugged Danielle, apologizing for not stepping forward sooner. Change was happening right there on the sidewalk. Not loud. Not chaotic. Just people seeing each other. Officer Grant returned to the school to give an update. The cousin has been detained, he said. There are serious charges being examined. The district is launching an independent investigation. And Principal Agron, he hesitated. He's been placed on immediate administrative leave. Danielle breathed out slowly, as if releasing months of fear from her lungs. Justice doesn't erase pain, but it makes room for healing. Grant knelt in front of Kayla. You gave us truth today, he said. Most grown folks go their whole lives without speaking up like that. What you did, that takes courage. Kayla's chin dipped shyly. Bear says being brave just means trying even when you're scared. Grant nodded, sounds like he's right. As the crowd thinned and the sun dipped lower, the Guardians formed a loose circle around Kayla and Danielle. Not tight, not intimidating, just protective. Bear looked down at Kayla. You ready to head home, little one? Can you walk with us again? She asked. Always. So they walked. Not in a parade. Not in a spectacle. Just a child holding her mother's hand, with a quiet shield of riders making sure she reached home safely. Neighbors waved from porches. Cars slowed respectfully. Some people clapped softly as they passed, as though they understood the moment deserved reverence. Because what they were seeing wasn't just a child being escorted. It was a community choosing to be better. When they reached the apartment steps, Kayla turned to Bear. "Are you gonna come back tomorrow?" she asked, voice tiny. Bear chuckled. "We'll be around. Might not bring the whole crew every day." Diesel coughed loudly behind him, as if disagreeing, "But someone will be here for you." Kayla smiled. A real smile. Wide, bright, unburdened. Then she reached up and hugged Bear's leg, small arms wrapped around the leather vest worn by a man who, only yesterday, was a stranger. "Thank you for listening," she whispered. And that quiet sentence, that was the entire story. Because that was all she ever needed. Someone to listen. Someone to believe her. Someone to say, "You matter." Bear's voice grew thick as he answered, "You deserved it, kiddo." Mama Joe leaned in. "You call us if you ever feel scared again, for any reason, day or night, you hear me." Kayla nodded. The riders stepped back, engines warming with a low, comforting rumble. Danielle scooped her daughter into her arms, holding her close, kissing her forehead. "Baby," she whispered, "I am so proud of you." "You're not mad I left?" Kayla asked. Danielle shook her head and pressed her forehead to her daughter's. "No, I'm proud you found a way to keep yourself safe. You showed more courage than most adults ever will." Kayla rested her head on her mother's shoulder. And for the first time in a long time, she felt light. The Guardians rode off into the golden evening one by one, tires whispering against asphalt. Danielle and Kayla watched from the porch until the final motorcycle disappeared around the bend. The world felt different. Not perfect. Not fixed. But different. Safer. Louder with truth. Quieter with fear. Kayla leaned into her mother's chest. "Mommy," she whispered. "Yes, baby. Can we tell other kids they can ask for help too?" Danielle closed her eyes, emotion washing over her. "Yes," she said softly, "we're gonna tell the whole world." Later that night, after Kayla fell asleep with her sunflower helmet beside her bed, Danielle sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. She let the quiet settle into her bones. Some battles are won loudly. Others are won just by showing up. By listening. By standing still and refusing to move aside when a child needs you. Kayla had taught a town that truth doesn't shout. Sometimes it's spoken in a trembling voice at 7 in the morning inside a diner. Sometimes justice arrives on 2 wheels. Danielle whispered into the night to no one and everyone at once. Some battles are won without raising your voice, only standing tall. And somewhere in the distance, faint but steady, she thought she heard the low, familiar rumble of motorcycles. A sound that now meant only one thing: safety, strength, and a promise kept.